My dogs always know when a storm is coming, but that night, they weren't reacting to the weather. Long before the sky changed, before the first drop of rain hit the roof, all 50 dogs in my kennel started pacing. Their claws clicked against the concrete in restless chaos. They felt something building in the air. I run an independent kennel in the foothills of the Cascades. The property consists of my residential cabin and a huge, climate-controlled steel barn housing 60 individual enclosures. When the weather holds, the job is mostly feeding schedules and sanitation. When the weather turns, you become a warden trying to keep a riot from boiling over. The forecast predicted a massive low-pressure system moving down from British Columbia. The local radio warnings advised securing loose property. By 10 at night, the wind stripped the dead branches from the Douglas firs lining the property boundary. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping black tea, listening to the first droplets of water impact the tin roof. The rain did not arrive gently. It hit the metal siding in a relentless, punishing deluge. Within minutes, the dirt driveway transformed into a flowing river of mud. A white flash lit up the kitchen through the window panes, bleaching the room in a sudden glare. 2 seconds elapsed. The thunder hit hard enough to rattle the plates in my cupboards. The glow of my overhead lights flickered, dimmed to a dull orange, and died entirely. The valley grid failed. I sat in the darkness, listening to the storm tear at the cedar shingles. 30 seconds later, the standby diesel generator housed behind the barn roared to life. The automated transfer switch engaged, restoring essential power. The generator powers the medical refrigerators for canine medication, the well pump, and a few emergency floodlights outside the barn. I waited for the dogs to settle. Usually, the noise of the rain creates a white noise buffer. Instead, a solitary bark cut through the drone of the storm. It was a Rottweiler mix named Boomer, stationed in an outdoor run at the far end of the facility. I understand canine vocalizations. A fear bark is high-pitched, rapid, and frantic. Boomer was not afraid. He issued a deep, chest-rattling warning, a territorial challenge. 2 seconds later, the entire pack joined him. 50 dogs screaming into the storm, their voices overlapping into a deafening chorus of hostility. They were throwing their bodies against the galvanized wire mesh of their enclosures. Dogs do not issue a pack warning for a thunderclap. They do it when a coyote breaches the tree line. I set my mug down. I walked to the mudroom. I pulled a yellow vinyl slicker over my shoulders and slid my feet into tall rubber boots. I retrieved a high-lumen halogen torch from the charging cradle on the wall. I unlatched the front door and stepped out into the tempest. The rain lashed my face, stinging my eyes. The roar of the wind stripping the pine needles from the canopy was absolute. The floodlights cast pale, overlapping pools of light across the wet gravel, leaving deep shadows in between. I waded through the pooling water, aiming my torch toward the outdoor runs. The facility layout is simple. A long central corridor separates 2 rows of wire enclosures. A secure, 10-foot-tall perimeter fence wraps the entire exterior yard to prevent escapes. I approached the primary access gate. The steel padlock was missing. The thick metal latch hung loose. My breath stalled. For a second I couldn't move. Someone had cut that lock, and they were still here. My hands tightened around the torch, slick inside the rubber grip. I stepped through the gateway, entering the main corridor of the outdoor runs. The dogs were in a state of absolute frenzy. They ignored my presence entirely. Every single one of them pressed their snouts against the wire mesh, barking furiously toward the southern end of the aisle. The noise was physically punishing in the enclosed space. I raised my torch, sending the beam slicing through the falling rain. The corridor extended 50 yards. At the far end, beyond the reach of the halogen bulb, the aisle faded into total obscurity. I needed to secure the perimeter. If a latch failed in this panic, I would have multiple dogs lost in a flooded forest. I began walking down the concrete aisle, checking each gate as I passed. Every single one was locked. The storm surged. A massive lightning strike ruptured the sky directly overhead. For a split second, the entire valley was flooded in a harsh, blinding white light. The strobe effect exposed the far end of the corridor. Standing 30 yards away, perfectly still in the rain, was a man. He wore no wet weather gear. A saturated dark sweater clung to his frame. His back was turned to me, his focus directed toward the enclosures. The darkness slammed back down as the lightning faded. The thunderclap hit a second later, shaking the concrete under my boots. I froze. I aimed my torch directly at the spot where the figure had stood. The beam cut through the sheets of rain. The aisle was empty. That wasn't possible. There was nowhere to go. I swept the light left. I swept it right. The corridor is bordered by 10-foot-tall wire mesh on both sides. A human cannot scale that fencing in less than 2 seconds. The only way to vanish from that walkway was to retreat through the rear maintenance door or step inside an enclosure. I swallowed a dry knot in my throat. I continued moving forward, my rubber soles squeaking wetly against the concrete. I checked the kennel manifests mentally. We were under capacity for the holiday weekend. Run number 14 was unoccupied. The client had canceled their reservation the previous morning due to the incoming weather. I reached enclosure 12. A German shepherd lunged against the wire, snapping its jaws toward the empty cage next door. I stepped in front of run 14. Every instinct told me not to get closer, but leaving it unchecked felt worse. The brass slide bolt was pulled back. The wire door stood open a few inches, swaying slightly in the wind. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice tighter than I expected. The storm swallowed the sound. No answer. I hesitated, already wishing I hadn't said anything. Then I raised the torch toward the opening and clicked it on. The blinding light flooded the interior of the 6x10 concrete pen. The light swept over a stainless steel water bowl, then the plastic cot on the floor. The pen appeared vacant. I stepped closer to the wire, angling the beam toward the far corner, near the opaque plastic divider that separates the runs. The man was crouched on the floor, pressed against the divider, using it to stay out of the corridor's sightline. His clothes were soaked and plastered to his skin with mud. In his right hand, he gripped a pair of long-handled bolt cutters. When the light hit him, he flinched hard, jerking away from the divider and scrambling deeper into the corner like an animal caught off guard. Then a slow, deliberate smile stretched across his wet face. He raised the bolt cutters, tapping the forged steel jaws against the concrete wall. The sound was barely audible over the roaring rain, but the intent was unmistakable. He had breached the perimeter, cut the master lock, and selected an empty cage to wait in. He knew the barking would draw the handler out of the residence. He simply waited for me to walk past the open door. I took one step back, then another. I didn't turn around. I maintained the beam on his face, retreating down the aisle, moving faster with every step. I cleared the access gate, bolted across the flooded gravel lot, and locked myself inside the main cabin. I grabbed my hunting rifle from the safe and dialed the county sheriff. The storm washed out the access road. The deputies required 2 hours to reach the property. They searched the facility with tactical lights and drawn weapons. The man was gone. He left the bolt cutters resting neatly in the center of the empty kennel cot. They never identified a suspect. The deputies told me transients sometimes exhibit erratic behavior during severe weather events. I upgraded my perimeter security the following week, reinforced the gates, installed motion lights across the property, but I no longer rely on the fence. I rely on my dogs. When the barometric pressure drops and a storm begins to rattle the tin roof, I sit at my kitchen table and listen. I do not look out the windows. I just wait to hear if the dogs are barking at the thunder, or if they are barking at a shadow walking through the rain. I don't know who decided to build houses in a flood zone, but whoever they are, they owe me a new basement. I'm 45. I've lived in this miserable, sinking split level out in the Missouri basin for 10 years. You spend a decade dealing with bad plumbing and cracked foundations. You stop getting scared of nature. You just get annoyed. A couple of weeks ago, a massive squall line rolled in off the plains. The meteorologists on the radio were acting like it was the end of the world. Typical panic, I ignored it. I went down to the basement, cracked open a cheap beer, and sat in my recliner to watch a baseball game. The basement is basically half finished. One side is my man cave with the television and a worn-out rug. The other side is just exposed concrete, a massive water heater, and a couple of egress windows right at ground level. Those windows are supposed to let you escape if there's a fire. Mostly, they just let spiders in. Anyway, around 9 o'clock, the storm finally hit. The wind started screaming, tearing at the vinyl siding upstairs. The television flickered, the screen digitized into a block of colorful squares and died entirely. The lights went out with a sad little pop, complete, total darkness. Perfect, I muttered to the empty room. I set my beer on the side table. I don't panic in the dark. I know my own house. I stood up and started shuffling across the rug, heading toward the concrete side of the basement to grab the heavy emergency flashlight I keep near the breaker panel. The rain outside sounded like a power washer hitting the house. I kept my hand on the drywall, guiding myself past the recliner, moving into the unfinished laundry section. A sharp, grinding sound echoed off the cinderblock walls. It was loud, real loud, and it wasn't coming from upstairs. It came from right in front of me. The unmistakable sound of metal scraping against concrete. I stopped walking. My eyes hadn't adjusted to the pitch-black basement yet. "Hello," I yelled. I sounded ridiculous. I knew my wife was working a late shift at the hospital. No answer, just the roaring rain. Then, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the basement for a split second. The stark white light poured through the small egress window near the ceiling. In that fraction of a second, I saw exactly what made the scraping noise. The metal latch on the egress window was broken. The glass pane was swung wide open, and dangling halfway through the narrow opening was a pair of legs. Somebody was trying to squeeze through the window backward, sliding down the concrete wall directly into my basement. The lightning faded. The basement snapped back to absolute darkness. I didn't yell hello again. A spike of raw, unadulterated fear hit my chest. Nobody crawls into a dark, flooded basement through a tiny window for any good reason. I heard a heavy thud as a pair of boots hit the concrete floor right next to my water heater. He was inside. He didn't turn on a flashlight. He didn't speak. I could hear wet, ragged breathing over the sound of the storm outside. He was less than 15 feet away from me. I started backing up slowly. My foot hit the edge of the rug. I winced, waiting for him to notice the sound. "I know you're down here," a voice grunted in the dark. It wasn't a scared teenager looking for shelter. The voice belonged to a grown man, rough, gravelly, and completely out of breath. "I saw the television light from the yard," the guy wheezed. "Don't try anything stupid. Just stay quiet and let me wait this out." He wasn't trying to rob me. He was using my house to hide. From what I didn't know, but whatever it was had him desperate enough to break in. I didn't move. None of it made sense. A strange man breaks into my house, traps me in a pitch-black basement, and tells me to stay quiet. I had no idea if he was armed, or if someone was chasing him through the storm outside. I backed up another step, trying to put distance between myself and the water heater. My heel hit the metal base of a floor lamp. It wobbled, clinking loudly against the wall. "I told you not to move," the man hissed. His boots scuffed against the concrete. He was moving toward the finished side of the room, moving toward me. I scrambled blindly backward, falling into my recliner. I reached under the side table, feeling the cold, familiar shape of a heavy steel tire iron I kept there. I don't know why I originally stored it there, probably meant to fix a lawnmower and forgot it, but I gripped the metal shaft with both hands. "Look, man," I stammered, raising the iron into the dark. "Take whatever you want, just get out." "Shut up," he snapped. He was close enough that I could smell wet wool and cheap alcohol. "I'm not leaving until the sirens pass." A massive crash of thunder shook the house. While the thunder was booming, the heavy metal door at the top of the basement stairs burst open. A bright beam of a high-powered tactical flashlight cut down the wooden steps, sweeping across the basement. "Police, show me your hands," a loud voice commanded from the top landing. The beam hit the intruder. He was standing right next to my recliner, dripping muddy water onto the rug. In his right hand, he was clutching a rusted, heavy pipe wrench. He looked at the stairs. He didn't drop the wrench. He didn't raise his hands. He turned around and lunged back toward the open egress window, throwing his body up against the concrete wall, trying to pull himself back outside. Two officers rushed down the stairs, tackling the guy by the legs before he could clear the window frame. They dragged him down onto the concrete, yelling orders, pressing his face into the wet floor. I sat in my recliner, clutching the tire iron, completely frozen. The officers didn't even look at me until the guy was in cuffs. They hauled him upstairs. One of the cops stayed behind, shining his light on my face. "You okay, buddy?" he asked, breathing hard. I nodded slowly. I dropped the tire iron on the rug. "Yeah, I don't know what happened." The cop holstered his light. "Guy just robbed a convenience store a mile down the road. Beat the clerk pretty bad with that wrench. The storm forced him off the main road, so he started cutting through backyards trying to ditch our tracking dogs." They hauled the guy away in a cruiser. I spent the next 3 hours sitting at my kitchen table, drinking cold coffee, waiting for the sun to come up. I fixed that broken egress latch the very next morning. I drove heavy concrete anchors straight through the metal frame. I still watch the games in the basement. I still drink cheap beer. But if the power goes out, I don't wait in the dark anymore. I grab a flashlight immediately. My parents viewed independence as a mandatory skill. If you were old enough to operate a microwave, you were old enough to stay home alone. I was 13. The rules were simple. Do not answer the door, do not cook on the stove, and complete your math homework. We lived in a massive, sprawling tri-level house situated at the dead end of a newly constructed subdivision in Florida. The lots behind our property were undeveloped swamp land, miles of dense cypress trees and thick, humid air. It was mid-August. The heat was punishing. My parents left for an anniversary dinner at a restaurant downtown around 6 in the evening. I locked the deadbolt, pulled a soda from the fridge, and booted up my gaming console in the basement living room. In Florida, summer weather does not transition. It attacks. Around 8 o'clock, the atmospheric pressure in the room plunged. My ears popped. The ambient hum of the central air conditioner cut off instantly. I set my controller down on the carpet. The silence lasted 3 seconds before a catastrophic crack of thunder rattled the foundation. The lights in the basement flickered rapidly and died, plunging the space into deep shadow. I grabbed my cell phone from the sofa cushion to dial my mother's number to report the outage. The screen displayed a no service error. I was completely cut off. The rain began hammering the basement egress windows with the force of a high-pressure hose. I decided to locate a flashlight. My father stored a heavy-duty mag light in the top drawer of the kitchen island on the main level. I climbed the carpeted stairs in the dark, navigating by the brief, brilliant flashes of lightning blinded the hallway. I reached the kitchen, tracing my hand along the edge of the granite counter until my fingers brushed the drawer pull. I extracted the metal cylinder and clicked the rubber button. The house creaked around me as the wind tore at the roof shingles. I aimed the beam toward the rear of the house. The kitchen opened into a large sunroom with sliding glass doors facing the swamp. I froze. The beam of my flashlight caught something on the back deck. A figure stood there, drenched by the torrential rain. It was a man. He wore a faded, saturated yellow rain slicker. The hood was pulled up, shielding his face from the downpour. He was pressing his face close to the glass, using his hands as a visor against the glare, peering directly into the dark sunroom. I killed the flashlight instantly. The darkness flooded back, blinding my adjusted vision. I dropped into a crouch behind the kitchen island, pulling my knees to my chest, my heart battered against my ribs. Luckily, he didn't notice me or the light from my flashlight. He was focused on the sliding door latch. My father was obsessive about home security. He placed a thick wooden dowel in the bottom track of the sliding door to prevent the glass from gliding open, even if the primary lock failed. The glass rattled violently in its frame. The man was throwing his weight against the pane, trying to bypass the friction of the dowel. The thick glass groaned but held its position. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening to the violent shaking of the door. The rattling ceased, the wind howled outside. I waited, holding my breath, hoping he abandoned the effort to seek easier shelter. Then I heard it. It wasn't a thunderclap. It was the distinct, shattering impact of a solid object striking glass. The safety glass didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed, still holding together in small, fractured cubes. A heavy object, likely a rock retrieved from the landscaping, slammed into the pane a second time. A hole ruptured near the locking handle. He reached a gloved arm through the jagged opening. I heard the muffled clatter of the wooden dowel hitting the tile floor as he removed the physical barrier. The heavy door slid open on its track. The storm rushed into the house, bringing the smell of wet earth. I was 13, unarmed and trapped in an isolated subdivision with zero communication. I remained curled behind the island cabinet. I listened to his movements. He didn't rush, but operated with an eerie, unhurried pace. He moved from the sunroom into the dining area. He swept the beam of a small penlight across the walls, assessing the space. He began pulling out the drawers of a wooden credenza. Finding valuables in the dark requires time. I realized remaining stationary was a lethal error. If he entered the kitchen, the island offered no physical protection. I needed to move. The main staircase leading to the second floor was positioned just beyond the kitchen archway. The upper level contained the bedrooms, including the master suite, which possessed a solid core door and a reinforced lock. A massive clap of thunder shook the floorboards. Using the booming noise as cover, I crawled out from behind the island. I stayed low to the tile, creeping toward the archway. The penlight beam swung casually across the ceiling, missing my position. I reached the bottom of the stairs. I abandoned the crawl. I placed my hands on the carpeted stairs, utilizing all four limbs to ascend the staircase rapidly and silently in the dark. I reached the second floor landing and turned down the hallway, heading toward my parents' room. I gripped the brass doorknob, twisted, and pushed the door open. The dry metal hinges issued a sharp, whining protest that cut through the entire house. I stopped breathing. Downstairs, the sound of rummaging abruptly ceased. The intruder realized the house was occupied. "Hello," a deep, muffled voice called out from the living room below. It didn't sound aggressive, it sounded chillingly calm. "Is someone upstairs?" I didn't answer. I slipped into the bedroom, pulling the door shut as quietly as possible, and engaged the thumb-turn lock. I retreated to the far corner of the room, squeezing myself into the narrow gap between the heavy oak armoire and the wall. I clutched my dead cell phone, staring at the signal indicator, praying it would change. The sound of wet, squeaking boots approached the bottom of the staircase. He didn't yell again, he just began the ascent. Heavy footsteps hit the stairs. He cleared the landing and moved down the hallway. He tested the handle of the guest bathroom. Locked. He moved down the corridor and tested the door to my bedroom. Locked. He reached the master suite. The brass knob rattled. He twisted the hardware, confirming the barrier. He didn't bang his fists against the wood. He didn't demand entry. He leaned close to the gap beneath the door. "I know you don't have a landline," he whispered through the gap. The proximity of his voice sent a shockwave of nausea through my gut. Storm knocked the cell towers out. You can't call anyone. He threw a massive amount of body weight against the wood panel near the locking mechanism. The doorframe splintered slightly, issuing a sharp cracking sound. He stepped back to strike the barrier again. A pair of blindingly bright headlights swept across the bedroom wall. A vehicle had pulled into the driveway. My parents had abandoned their dinner reservation due to the severe weather warnings. The loud hum of a heavy garage door opener engaged below us. The impact against the bedroom door stopped. I heard the frantic squeal of wet rubber reversing down the hallway. He vaulted down the main staircase, crashing through the kitchen and out the broken sliding door, sprinting back into the swamp, gone before my parents even reached the front door. My father found me huddled behind the armoire 10 minutes later, clutching the unlit flashlight. After that night, my parents never left me home alone after sunset again. I am 22 now, but I still hate thunderstorms.